Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the legislative work session that we're having this afternoon. And Melanie, according to my notes, we stopped where the first one on our agenda today was going to be 11:21. Is that in agreement with you, or if not, where are we starting?
That is an agreement with me. However, I don't think we have to discuss that one because both the council and the county executive took a position on that piece of legislation back in October. So I think we can go ahead, if you just in the interest of time, go ahead and start with 12, if that works for you.
Fine with me, and I see no one on the council saying that doesn't work for them, so we're going to move on quickly. All right.
Okay. All right. Amy Saman.
1221 is the only other alcohol bill on the agenda this year, and this is simply to add Class H licenses, beer and wine licenses in Damascus to the list of entities that can go to the Board of License Commissioners to get a refillable or non-refillable container permit for draft beer. This was at the request, my understanding, from Senator Zucker at the Hornet's Nest Grill. They're currently using that authorization under Governor Hogan's executive order to do so, and they simply, once that order expires, they simply want to continue to be able to do it. So there are 3 different licenses throughout the counties that can do this, and this would just add the Class H in Damascus to that list. The county executive supports the bill.
Is that without objection? Oh, Councilmember Rice.
No, I was just going to say move to support. Thanks.
It's been moved to support by Councilmember Rice. Councilmember Friedson is seconding it. All those in favor, please raise your hand. And that is unanimous. Okay. Next, please.
Okay, the next bill is actually my only bill, and it pertains to the Burtonsville crossing. And the bill would require the county to begin the process of acquiring the Burtonsville crossing property within a specified amount of time, either by purchase or through its powers of condemnation.
Okay.
Mr. President?
Yes.
On this one, I had spoken to Senator Zucker over the weekend, and they're still in discussions with the executive branch and the affected parties. So he asked us to just hold on this and not take a position at this time.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Reamer.
I was just going to recommend the same. We just keep our eyes on this. Thank you.
All right. Unless there's objection, we're going to move on. We're going to just keep our eyes on this one. Thank you.
All right. Then let's move on to the public campaign financing. I think that's Kathleen.
Ismail, this is straightforward. It is an enabling bill that would allow the county to expand its public financing program to four offices: clerk of the circuit court, register of wills, sheriff, and state's attorney. County executive supports the bill.
Okay. Is there anyone from council staff that would like to give advice on this one?
Council President Katz, I would just note staff had recommended holding at this time pending more information about the any fiscal implications of this bill. With that said, as Ms. Boucher noted, this is enabling legislation. So were you to support it, it doesn't mean that you would have to necessarily enact a law based upon it. But there was a somewhat similar bill last year in which the county council had decided to hold pending more information about the fiscal implications of the bill. So consistent with that, staff had recommended holding it at this point.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Jawando.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm sure many of my colleagues are familiar with this and have spoken to Majority Leader Lukey about it and Delegate Moon. I think it's a smart bill. Again, it's enabling, to council staff's point. It's consistent with our what we've done in being a leader in the state, in the region around public financing and council and county executive races. And again, as we're seeing this year, when we have unprecedented times, the funding issues always come to our doorstep anyway, and we can deal with those as they come. But I think having this authority, taking a further step towards public financing, which should be the goal, is more inclusive of more residents, helps get a more diverse crew of candidates. I think we should be on record in support. So I'd like to move that we support it.
Okay, it's been moved by, thank you. It's been moved by Councilmember Jwanda, seconded by Councilmember Glass. All those in favor, please raise your hand. And that is unanimous. Okay.
I'm not sure it was unanimous, Mr. President. I think some people might have wanted to discuss it. I don't know. I didn't see every hand go up.
If they did, they didn't tell me. So I haven't gotten anybody else other than you on the list. Is there anybody else that wants to discuss it?
Yeah, I was just curious in terms of, and I am definitely in support of expansion of making sure that we're able. But I was just curious because, as it was stated before, we had said that we were going to wait previously to understand the fiscal impact. I understand that this is enabling, but there is a concern with unfunded mandates, if you will, given the fact that I don't think we have even put forth the amount of money required or recommended by the committee for what we have in place right now, and that is because of the financial difficulties. So I guess I'm just interested in understanding the dynamic and how this is going to work. Once we have enabling legislation, obviously there's going to be a lot of interest for us to expand this. I understand that. That is going to mean that we are going to need a lot more money in the fund. And if we're not able to do that, then it kind of defeats the purpose. So I guess I was just curious. I didn't realize we were just going to vote right away, but I was just curious if our staff had any more information regarding what we did last time and why we said that we were going to, wait. I was trying to process all of that because it kind of happened very quickly.
Okay. Staff, do you have any additional information?
Yes, sorry. To Councilmember Navarro's question, I don't actually. What I saw was the hold last year pending wanting more financial or fiscal information. But I think I would need to go back and watch the video to get a sense of what discussion may have surrounded that. I don't know if OIR has any additional context they're able to share. Sorry about that.
I do not have any additional context. I would need to do what Ms. Wellens just indicated to understand more other than the hold last year.
And I appreciate that. Councilmember Friedson, before he speaks, I have no problem with this because it's enabling legislation. I think that if we decide that we can't afford it, then that's a whole nother story. And it's a real possibility that we're going to have to decide that. But if we don't even have the ability to decide whether we can afford it or not, I think that brings us to another issue. Councilmember Friedson.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I mean, I guess my concern is the community expectations that we're creating with this. I also think that there are some of the positions in here are unique. Register of Wills, for instance, that's a county elected official with state employees. Yeah. There's a reasonable expectation that the state should be paying the bill for that. I think the state should be paying the bill for many of these. I think that there's a lot of conversations that need to happen. The likelihood of us being able to set up this system prior to the next gubernatorial election, which is fast approaching in 19 months, seems unlikely. And so I think, this is a good idea. I very much support the idea. I don't think it's fully baked in terms of figuring out how it would work. And, I think that there needs to be much more robust conversations between the county and the state. And I don't think that many of those have happened to date in terms of how we would implement this, who would fund it, how much it would cost, what the expectations are for that. And I think that before we set the community expectation for this in supporting it and passing it, that we should have an idea of what direction it's headed and how and who is going to pay for it.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Reamer.
To continue that thread, I mean, this is enabling. So someone has to draft legislation and figure out what are the appropriate matches for these different offices, and do that based on some kind of understanding of the historic, fundraising for those campaigns. It's a lot of work, actually. So I think we ought to at least say, I'm not sure who would do that yet. I don't know that any council member is going to devote themselves to that. Maybe some will. But I think there's a very strong, many of us are using the public finance system. It has been a real success, and the work to maintain it and to fund it, as Councilmember Navarro said, is pretty significant in and of itself. So to the point of community expectations, it's not immediately clear what we would do with this enabling authority, and whether there's a lot of interest to actually put in the work to make it happen for offices from which there really aren't a lot of big moneyed interests that go after the Register of Wills. We're not trying to level the playing field in that campaign. So I don't know, some ambivalence, I guess.
Okay, Councilmember Rice.
Thank you, Mr. President. So, having sat in one of those seats, just because you put forth enabling legislation doesn't mean that you couldn't send money with it as well. Of course, that would mean it has a fiscal note, which means it's much more difficult to pass. But those are options that are provided. And so from that perspective, I couldn't agree more with what Councilmember Navarro said. You're already challenged with being able to fund the current positions that you have, adding additional positions on, enabling or not, without a direct tie to additional resources is problematic. I don't know why you would pass enabling legislation without money, knowing that you couldn't actually functionally make it happen without the money. That to me is a flawed piece of legislation. So from that perspective, I don't think we should be supporting it right now. I'm fine with doing a hold or whatever the case may be. But again, without the money, what's the point? Because we can't even do what we can't even stand up everything that we want to stand up now with our current process. And that's not even with everybody participating. Keep in mind that a lot of you did, some of us didn't. And so from that perspective, imagine with open seats, both Councilmember Reamer, myself, Councilmember Navarro, and still having all of the at-larges, it's one of those things where, again, there's going to be a huge run on money. And so to even make it seem as though we're going to have additional money for additional positions, just doesn't make sense to me from that perspective. So again, I think it's something that we shouldn't support, but certainly fine with holding it for the time being, or whatever the case of the general body wants to do.
Councilmember Glass.
Thank you, Mr. President. I think the questions raised by everybody are spot on. They are exactly the type of questions that we should be engaged in if this ever moves forward. And it would be premature for anyone to focus on answering those questions until there was enabling legislation, which is why I'm supporting this. Let's have the authority to do this, and then we can engage in a public conversation about whether the Register of Wills needs the types of protections and safeguards to level the playing field, to protect candidates from special interests, and then whether or not there is money that the county has to devote to those efforts. I think it's getting the cart before the horse, trying to answer those questions without even having the enabling legislation. But they're all exactly the right questions that we need to ask. And I'm hoping that we get the enabling legislation so that we can start having that public conversation. And if at the end of the day we decide that now is not the time, or these are not the types of public positions that warrant participation in public financing, I think that would be justified after a public conversation. I yield back.
Thank you, Councilmember Albornoz.
Thanks, Mr. President. I appreciate the discussion as well. I think that everybody raises good points. The one that's the most compelling for me at the moment in giving me pause on supporting, even enabling this, is the connection to the state and those positions. And what the ramifications are of that. from a policy perspective, from a funding perspective, et cetera. And it sounds like council staff needs a little bit more time to process and digest what we had discussed last year. So we're probably not in a position to answer that right now. If they are, then great. But until I get a little bit more clarity on how this impacts Register of Wills and the fact that this technically is a state employee, I don't feel comfortable voting on it right this second, holding it until I get those answers. That's just me.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Navarro.
Thank you. Wanted to answer Councilmember Reamer when he said he doesn't know who's going to get into this, or, you know, well, yeah, I mean, as he recalls, the GO committee spent a lot of time figuring and sorting all of this out when we were deliberating on this bill. A lot of extraordinary work went into it, and you know, it was unprecedented in many ways. So I do think, as Councilmember Reamer was saying, I mean, there is going to have to be a lot of work put into this, and the fiscal piece is critical. The fact of the tie to the state, specifically with these positions, I think are super important. And so I guess that is why I feel that, at least for some, you know, somebody that had to lead the committee and put so much effort into figuring out how to put forth the current program with the current positions that we have, you know, I would prefer that we take no position. I think that there is something to be said about supporting particular pieces of legislation where you definitely have an unfunded mandate. Those of us who participated know that there are still a lot of resources needed for more positions to help candidates. The software and the program itself needed its resources, and it was quite a challenge. And so, you know, for all of those reasons, I personally would prefer that we take no position. Because again, once you move to support something that is enabling, there is that expectation that you're going to proceed and you're going to do something. I personally believe that where we are right now, we're pretty good. It's been almost like an experiment. We shall see how it continues with the second cycle. So I would just like to, I would prefer that we take no position this time.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Reamer.
Right. I think Councilmember Navarro says it well. Maybe we ought to just hold off on this for now. Think about whether there's any amendments. Like Councilmember Alvarez, I need to think a little bit more about these state positions and whether they'd be positions that, you know, we ought to appropriately pay for, or whether we ought to say, it's nice that you'd like to give us the authority. We'd like you to give us some funding as well. I just need a little more time to think that kind of thing through. So.
Thank you. Councilmember Jawando.
Thank you, Mr. President. I agree that these are all important considerations. Again, I think we want to be in the business of having more authority and more flexibility to do what we need to do and have those conversations. If we want to get the authority and then say, hey, we, Delegate Lukey, Delegate Moon, please, you know, come back. We've looked at it. We're going to need some, you know, funding. You know, we think this should be X and Y, pass another bill. That's fine. And that's part of the back and forth. But I think, you know, getting this authority, I do think I will note that the Register of Wills and Clerk of the Court, while they are important, you know, very different than the sheriff and the state's attorney, who are focusing on crime and other issues within Montgomery County for Montgomery County residents. So I think those are extremely important state mandated, funded, but county funded positions. You know, those budgets come from us. And so I just think, I don't know why we wouldn't want the authority. And this is coming from a year ago where we held last year. So, you know, I think we get the authority, we can do all the considerations, have the deliberative process. We didn't spend all the money in the election fund last year with many candidates. So I think, again, the amounts of money too for registers of wills, and that could all be figured out, as Councilmember Navarro mentioned, in committee and over time. But I think we should, you know, just get the authority now. Thank you.
Thank you. I have to tell you, thinking about this really is a chicken and an egg. Which comes first? Do you wait for the authority and then discuss how you're going to pay for it? Or do you figure out how you're going to pay for it, then ask for the authority? And candidly, at this point, good conversation. I think we probably should wait to figure out where we are on this. And the fact that we didn't spend all the money is one thing, but we allocated many millions of dollars just for the councils itself. And there's discussion about whether or not there should be, whether we should be looking at the Board of Education, which is also strictly a Montgomery County function. So I do believe that we need to wait on this one, though I understand it's just the enabling authority. I do think we need to have more answers now before we suggest that we even should have the enabling authority. So with that, is there a motion? Councilmember Navarro, did you make a motion just to put a hold on this?
I made a motion at the beginning, and I should have. I won't speak up next time for people who didn't get to, because I think it was sailing through. But I made a motion that was seconded by Councilmember Glass.
Okay, then there is a motion by Councilmember Giwando, seconded by Councilmember Glass. Thank you for that reminder. Yes, Councilmember Emer.
There is a motion, however, I would like to amend the motion. First of all, I don't think that we want to vote against this bill, and the motion was to approve it. So I don't know that council members want to vote no, as though they opposed.
Friendly amendment to Councilmember Giwando?
Well, I think the friendly amendment would be, let's take no position at this time and give this a little while longer to, see if there is an amendment that we want to see happen.
Councilmember Giwando, do you accept that friendly amendment?
Well, if we can commit to coming back to it in a time certain, I think, again, a year has passed, since the same concerns were raised and nothing happened. So if there's a course of action that will change that, I'm not trying to.
So
I think we should do that.
I think we could ask Christine, to talk to GO committee, get some feedback on what kind of requests the council might have. And if there is an amendment that we would want, I think it is interesting to say, do we want to accept this authority?
Money.
Without money.
Money.
So it might be that that's the amendment.
I'd support an amendment with state funding to go along with this.
Well, that would be an answer.
Well, I think we all would support that. But I think that's a separate question from the authority, of being able to do it.
No, Councilmember Rice is disagreeing with you on that. That's
okay. I know, but I just mean from my perspective on the motion, it's okay if we disagree.
So I think the motion is, let's get a little bit more time, have Christine work with the GO committee, and then at least we can have that before us. And I'm fine to consider this at a date certain when I've had a chance to really think all these things through, because there are a lot of implications for other state offices, as City mentioned, the BOE, and so on and so forth. So.
Can I ask Melanie, just what the timeline of this is and how soon, it's a pre-file, or what the deal is with this bill itself?
The next step in this process would be the state delegation hearing on it. And I honestly can't tell you offhand, but Kathleen might be able to, whether that hearing is taking place tomorrow or if it's on the 8th. But again, these types of conversations are not uncommon. It's a matter of, if you want to hold it, that's different, or if you want to take a position of no position. But there's time. The delegation's not going to vote on this immediately. I think they do plan to vote on it, though, before session begins. So
if I'd be comfortable holding, not taking no position, but holding, and then coming back to it before session begins. I would amend if that's a compromise that people can accept.
Okay, so your motion now is to hold.
But come back to it before Annapolis session begins so that we can give feedback.
I don't know how that's going to work, because we're going to go in recess next week. So, and they go and start in January. I don't know how that's going to work.
Councilmember Glass, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Councilmember.
I don't want to belabor this. I'm fine with the hold, right, and taking no position. And if we hearken back to how the campaign finance legislation that is currently on the books came about, there was enabling legislation, and then the council approved the system in 2014. so that it would take effect in the 2018 election. So this is a long road. I don't expect this would be implemented for the 2022 election. Let's just put that out there, right? But I appreciate the president talking about it in terms of the chicken or the egg, and I think you're right. And so I would like to just move forward and supporting this, to have some enabling legislation for us to take whatever action, if we take any action, and I recognize that is an option. That's why I'm supporting it, but fully supportive of the whole.
All right, so hold.
Okay.
Yeah.
A hold. So it's been moved and seconded, and I'm assuming Councilmember Glass accepted that.
Mr. President, I texted you. I wanted to speak.
Okay, please.
So I just want to be very clear because I think it's incredibly important for you guys. There is no either or. There is always an option of presenting a bill that's enabling that also comes with funding. And I know that you know that, so I'm not speaking to you as if you don't know that, but why it is that we would, if we all acknowledge the fact that we're not, cash rich and money just falling out of coffers, why we would not insist upon having some sort of resource coming along with this enabling legislation. I don't know why we would oppose something like that or think that something like that is bad or counterproductive or whatever the case may be. Especially for positions that are state mandated positions. It's very different if we're doing something that's a little bit aligned with where we are as a council. Board of Education is another one in which, quite honestly, the board and MCPS is a function of the state. Yes, we provide allocation for, but even that is mandated. That's mandated by the state in terms of how much money we give them. So from that perspective, why we wouldn't insist upon some sort of resources coming if we're going to be setting up all of these other institutions when it comes to public campaign finance, you're just giving away money. So again, I would just encourage folks as we have this discussion. I agree with Councilmember Glass. I think it's great. Sure, let's move forward. But at the same time, also insist that money come with it. I don't have an objection to the thing itself. It's just why you would not insist upon money coming with this to help allay the cost when we're strapped on so many other levels that it's going to take from other things that are important. We're just missing the boat. So anyway, just want to reiterate that because that's incredibly important. So any kind of hold and discussion, I think, needs to come with some sort of conversation around finances attached.
Thank you. Councilmember Friedson.
Yeah, I appreciate those points. A couple things that I would note. One, there's a big difference between the county executive and the county council. Those are established under our charter. To Councilmember Rice's point, every other position that we're talking about, whether it's school board or any of these courthouse positions, these are established under state law. That is a big, big difference. And I think we need to differentiate from that. I think there should be expectations for funding. We have the right to establish whatever we want under our charter. We have that vested authority. We don't get to choose which of these positions should occur and how they should occur and how many that should occur. And so the idea that we would be providing a blank check for that without any understanding or expectation of what it means or frankly any control over where it will end up is troubling. I don't think there's much of a state role after they give us authority. I think that turns into a set it or forget it situation. They say, we've done our job. We gave you the authority. It's now your job to figure it out, Montgomery County. And that is troubling. I'm not sure, I think that's like sending your cargo on the horse and not knowing where it's going to end up, to use the same, cart or horse scenario. I'm not sure it's which one goes first. I think it's you're signing a blank check. I will also point out, I do understand the dynamics here. The salary setting and personnel authority over the 24 Register of Wills occurs in the comptroller's office. It was part of my portfolio. I did this job. It is a bizarre Byzantine system of county elected officials, state employees under the state personnel regulations. There's all kinds of ramifications for what this means. This stuff is a lot more complicated than what we've led on. And so I think hold is the right move here, but I do think we need to really think this through. And also remember, there's no proposal that I have heard that has any chance of passage this session to do campaign financing, public financing for General Assembly members. And, I think it's a little bit troubling to me that, and I have great respect for the sponsors here, their colleagues and personal friends. And, I know it's not because they don't believe in it. It's not because the General Assembly, a majority of it doesn't believe in it. I think it's because of money. It's because of, cost concerns. And so the idea that, we wouldn't be discussing that, figuring out, what the costs are going to be, who's going to pay for them, making sure that if the state is mandating positions and the state would like to give us authority for public financing to run for those positions, that the state would be at least part, if not fully funding the campaign finance pot of money. And I don't think that once we get the authority, our ability to negotiate on that point remains. I think that our ability to negotiate on that point is over. And so we don't want to miss that opportunity if this is the direction that we choose to go.
Okay. So at this point, so I understand, and of course, Councilmember Friedson, the fact that you represent the Ag Reserve, you knew about the horse and the cart. I mean, I understand how that worked for you. Right now we have a motion. Councilmember Jawando, please correct me when I'm wrong. It's never if I'm wrong, it's when I'm wrong. We have a motion that says we're going to hold this. Is that correct?
Yes, and I think that's a unanimous thing, but yes, that's the motion.
Well, I thought it was unanimous last time, so don't ask me. But anyhow, and Councilmember Glass, you seconded it, and you were okay with that as well. I have no other speakers. All those in favor of holding this, please raise your hand. I have 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I have unanimous this time with hands up. Okay, thank you very much. Next is MC 1521, Deer Management Permit Pilot Program. Ms.
Go ahead, Amy. Yeah, that's Amy's bill, along with the CCE bill, which is next. So, Amy,
okay.
Go ahead.
Okay. This bill would establish a pilot program in the county to develop a commercial market for venison legally taken by a person holding a deer management permit. This reflects a policy recommendation from the Montgomery County Delegation Deer Management Work Group that met this summer. You'll recall there was a bill about deer management last year, and then they decided to do a work group. So that's where this bill comes from. This is kind of an interesting bill. Under current law, the sale or the purchase of wild venison is prohibited throughout the state. This would require the Maryland Department of Agriculture and the Department of Natural Resources to adopt regulations to implement the program and establish the requirements for processing, inspection, and labeling. And a deer management permit is somewhat difficult to get. It requires showing the crop damage. Inspector comes out from the Department of Natural Resources. So it is a narrow option. And actually, under current law, it's the Maryland Department of Health that has the authority to control interstate requirements on venison, not the other two entities. And I spoke with MDA, and they have no current authority to even enforce a deer meat inspection program at this time. There was a similar bill statewide in 2015. It did not make it out of the Senate committee. There was a significant amount of opposition. The Maryland Horse Council was in support of it, but there were hunting groups and that sort of thing that had objected to it. It hasn't been tried since then. The county executive chose not to take a position on the bill yet, and I do want to note that Jeremy Chris from the Office of Agriculture is also available on the call if you have questions.
Okay, thank you. Council staff, any comments? Any comments from council staff?
Oh, I was talking to myself. Hi.
Okay, how are you?
Hi, this is Carolyn Chen. Sorry about that. Linda McMillan is the analyst on this legislation, and we've been emailing to amend, to add reporting requirements, and also to review the capacity of the agencies that would oversee. So we're still pending on that, but we still recommend no position at this time.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Reamer.
Can staff, Melanie's team, is that Amy, explain why are the hunting and conservation groups opposed?
I'll I'll let Jeremy expand on this because I had the same question. But I think in that regard, the sportsman groups want to have the deer to hunt. And then the conservation groups want the natural environment, I believe, to stay in place. But that's what I understood from watching the hearing. I'll let Jeremy expand on that.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So the hunting groups are very concerned, and they protect the population of deer in every turn because this is what they live for. I mean, these are sport hunters. And so the concern was that perhaps a program like this would put additional pressure on the hunters now that some hunters, believe it or not, do have problems securing places where they can hunt. We've also seen a decrease in the number of sport hunters in the state. So it's not an easy question to answer, Councilmember Reamer, but in all the years I've been working in the deer management, I have developed an awareness that DNR and all of the groups that work closely with DNR are very, very protection oriented with the deer population, which is a large money-making proposition for DNR, which is not funded by other tax-supported funds.
And the concern is that under this permit, that there will be a lot more hunting, essentially. It's no longer, I'm really, can you characterize this legislation again for me, Jeremy?
It would no longer be a sport.
You know, in order to harvest the deer and take the meat and sell it commercially, as Amy said, it's going to require regulatory oversight of both the Department of Agriculture and the Department of Natural Resources. Now, the hunting groups, they work very closely with DNR as the hunting regulations are amended every other year. So I think, and we have looked at some other states that have a deer farm programs, Pennsylvania, North Carolina. They have legislation that allows farmers to raise deer, to raise venison on a farm, just like other livestock. But the meat has to be inspected by the regulatory authority before any animal is harvested. And it's going to have to be done in accordance with USDA meat regulatory requirements.
And I've never been one who's ever hunted, but I sold hunting licenses, so I'm much more of an expert than I ever should be. And I can tell you that it's a very, people who do hunt, and I know plenty of people that do hunt, but people that hunt, they're allowed one by a shotgun. The day after Saturday, I guess, was opening day for that someone could go out and get a deer by shotgun. They're allowed deer by bow and arrow. They're allowed deer, but it's a very limited amount that they can get. They can get an extra permit, but it costs them for that. And then if you go into a commercial system, and it's just like Jeremy was saying, unless you're actually raising them to be more of a domestic type of animal rather than a wild animal, then that takes away from the people who are hunting it for as a sport and eating and using the food for that. So I think candidly, no position is probably the best that we can do on this. There's so many twists and turns to it. It really is.
Second.
Well, I didn't make a motion.
I'll move it if Councilmember Rice wants a second.
Yeah, go ahead. All right.
Yeah, no, I would move no position.
It's been moved by Councilmember Rice and seconded by Councilmember Friedson for no position. Is everybody okay with? Please raise your hand if it's no position. And I say yes, no position, unanimous. Thank you. And the next one you were also discussing at the same time, please.
This one is the Community Choice Energy Pilot Program for Montgomery County. You'll recall seeing a statewide bill last year, and that one was then amended during session to become a pilot for Montgomery County and passed the House of Delegates last year in that fashion. What it would do is authorize the county to establish a community choice energy pilot program where the government could purchase or generate electricity for its residents and businesses. It would be approximately a duration of about 7 years. It would be an opt-out program, which means that customers would be automatically enrolled into the program. It would no longer be the standard offer service as the default. This is enabling legislation. So the county would have to enact the local law, set up the program. The bill also lays out the role of the Public Service Commission. And what's been added this year that's new is that it requires a community choice energy work group to be set up by the Public Service Commission. And the PSC would have to seek advice and recommendation from that group. And I do want to note this was part of the 2021 county priorities this year. And I believe that Delegate Charkoudian, the sponsor of the bill, is also on with us today. And the county executive supports the bill.
Okay. Is there a county council staff suggestion?
Hi, this is Carolyn. I think Keith is on the line. There we go.
There he is.
Hi, Keith.
Yeah, I think, as mentioned, it was a priority for the council. So the issue itself, I don't think is controversial in any way. The only point that's noted in the staff recommendation is there's a significant advertisement and notification requirement that I think we should just be conscious of and look at. And there might be some modifications to that might help make it a little less costly, perhaps. But that's not to impact the bill. That's not to say the bill itself should not be supported. But I just think in general, we should be looking at the cost implications of these and see if we can minimize them through the legislation process if possible.
Okay. Councilmember Reamer.
Well, I'd love to hear from Delegate Charkoudian, but I wanted to move support. I think this is an important piece of our clean energy agenda, and if we were to get it enacted at the state level, it'd enable the county to really make some big strides forward. But if it's okay with the council president, I'd like to invite Delegate Charkoudian to share a comment.
Well, as soon as you do, though, Councilmember Rice, you wanted to second it. Okay, please. Delegate, please.
Great. Well, thank you all so much for your support. Thanks for being here, and thanks for your thoughtful consideration of all of these bills. I think that probably at this point you've heard a good bit about the bill. So I will say that this is really a key piece of reaching zero greenhouse gas emissions net zero by 2035 in the electric sector. I mean, that's really why I've been moving this forward, is to give this to you as a tool. It is still enabling, as was said, so you ultimately could do all the analysis once the regs are done and decide not to move forward with it, but without going through the process of enabling the legislation and then having the PSC go through the regulatory process. You really wouldn't be able to do that analysis. I will speak to this question about advertising. It's an opt-out model. And what that means is right now, if your Pepco or BG&E or Potomac Edison is your opt-out. So if you do nothing, if you don't choose clean choice, or you don't choose Constellation, or you don't choose direct energy, then if you don't do anything, then you have Pepco as your default provider. With this, Pepco would still be the poles and the lines, but Montgomery County CCE would be your default provider. And the reason that's crucial is because that's what gives you the ability to negotiate on behalf of 360,000 odd households and get a really good price for clean energy for residents of Montgomery County. But because it's opt-out, this is where we work with the consumer protection folks. It's really important that people have a chance to understand what the program is. so that they can make an informed choice about whether they want to opt out or not. So there's this balancing act of having an opt out, because that's really what gives you the power to take advantage of the market and get cheap prices for consumers. And across the country, we've seen that CCEs do bring down prices for consumers. But at the same time, you do want to make sure people have an understanding of what their choices are. So that's the advertising piece. So I'm happy if there is a significant concern around the advertising, I'm happy to work with staff or others on that issue. It's the first time I've heard of it in the 2 years I've been working on this. It hadn't been on my radar before, but if it's something that the council wants to take a look at, we would need to balance that with the need to make sure that people have a full understanding so that our consumer protection commitments are also met.
Okay, thank you. Council Member Reamer, did you have anything in addition? No?
Let's do it.
Thank you. Council Member Rice, you're good?
I think we're good.
I have no other speakers, so we have a motion to approve this or to support this. All those in favor, please raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and that is unanimous. Thank you very much. Next is MC/PG 100-21.
Okay, these are all, the rest of the bills are all by county bills, so they're all Kathleen's, but the last three are actually bills that only apply to Prince George's County. So the end is in sight here.
All right, you're just doing that to entice us. I hear you.
Right, that's right.
I can see why you're in the business you're in. Okay. So with that, Kathleen, please.
All right, thank you, sir. So this first bill does relate to WSSC, and it addresses two different topics. One topic relates to, would require video streaming and live video streaming of the open meetings of the commission, and then maintaining an archived copy of the video on the WSSC's website. And the second component would change a part of state law that relates to the amount of a late payment fee that WSSC can charge for late payment of a bill. And right now under state law, there's a mandatory 5% charge, late payment charge. The bill changes that to make that a cap, so the WSSC could charge a fee up to 5%. And on the first part of the bill, I should say WSSC opposes the bill. We also have staff here on the call. We have the general counsel for WSSC on the call, as well as Karen Riley and Guy Andes from their intergovernmental relations team. And this is Delegate Charkoudian's bill, so she's here as well. Delegate Charkoudian, in response to some concerns raised by WSSC about teleconferences, has offered an amendment that would provide that if the commission meets by teleconference, that the commission must make a live audio stream publicly available on its website for each portion of the meeting that's held in open session. So the county executive supports the bill with Delegate Charkoudian's amendment, but also asked us to work with Delegate Charkoudian and WSSC staff to put some criteria in the bill about under what circumstances WSSC would charge less than 5%. Rather, there's no, right now it's totally wide open. And so we've been asked to work on an amendment that would clarify the criteria, that in some way would be targeted, that in essence it would be, you'd want to target the circumstances to meet, for example, financial needs of a customer. So we hope to work with Delegate Charkoudian and WSSC staff to find some language that makes sense there. And that's it.
Thank you, council staff.
Thank you, Mr. President. Council staff had recommended no position on this bill, and I suspect that hearing directly from the delegate and from WSSC will be most helpful to you. But just briefly, I wanted to give the reasoning. The first reason was that we weren't sure why WSSC would be held to kind of a higher standard than is required for all other public bodies under the Open Meetings Act. And, although of course it's commendable to, increase public transparency wherever we can, there was also, WSSC noted the concern that in emergency situations, it might not be feasible to do the live streaming. And then with regard to the late fees, again, others can probably speak to this better than I can, but there was the issue that WSSC's late fees are already quite low compared to other jurisdictions, and it didn't seem as though WSSC was likely to lower its late fees, even given that ability to do so. Thank you.
Thank you. Delegate Charkoudian.
Hey, do you want me to, can I do my own video? Oh, do you want, I'm not sure if you want video on. Apparently the host has stopped it, so I don't know if you want to see it, but I'm here looking at you.
Well, hopefully they cut it back on, but if you can comment while they're cutting it on, please.
Sure, I'll just, thanks. So I'll just briefly say that, so I think that this is offered in the spirit of supporting transparency. Last year, the General Assembly passed legislation to require the Stadium Authority, the State Board of Elections, Emergency Numbers Systems Board, Public Service Commission, Maryland Transportation Authority, and there's others who are required to live stream their videos, and that has been perfectly, the Interagency Committee on School Construction. Anyway, so there's several agencies that are in fact required to go beyond the Open Meetings Act law. So this was really in that spirit. I think WSSC has shown that they have the ability to do this, and it's been a real advantage. I mean, they've really demonstrated that they can do this. It's been good for transparency. However, there's been some situations where they've started an open meeting in the live stream, gone into closed meeting, which is of course not appropriate to live stream, and then continued without live streaming. And there's been decisions that have been made that folks haven't had a chance to have access to through the live streaming. So the idea is to set as a standard that meetings would be live streamed. And this is, I think, really the direction that we're heading. And I think it's appropriate for us to be heading in this direction to create more and more transparency and use the technology that we have access to. So having said that, I did hear the concern about teleconference. I have offered that amendment, and I also am working on an amendment. There was a concern about if there's technological issues, would the decisions be sort of null and void somehow? And they wouldn't, as I understand it, because the Open Meetings Act would protect those decisions. But I am working on, and there hasn't been a problem for any of these 6 or 7 other agencies. But I am working on an amendment that clarifies that if decisions are made and there's a technological glitch, if the other aspects of the Open Meetings Act have been followed, then it's still things don't become null and void because they weren't live streamed. So that's that part of it. In terms of the flexibility to meet consumer needs, I was surprised to find, I've spent a lot of work in the last 6 months, as have many of you, really helping consumers through figuring out how to get utility assistance. And so I spent a lot of time with all of the utilities, understanding their fee systems and the supports that are available for payment and payment plans. And I was just surprised to find the WSSC's statutory structure is different from any other utility. So every other utility has a cap, and WSSC has a required amount. And it just seems that it makes more sense for it to be consistent, where based on the year, the budget, the needs, there would be flexibility for the WSSC board, the commission, to make the decisions about what late fee level is right. Right now, they essentially have 2 choices, either the 5% fee or nothing. They do have the ability to waive the fee. This doesn't change or require that they lower their fee. I think one of the things you'll see in a lot of their commentary on this issue is that other water utilities have higher fees, which is higher caps, which is true. But I'm not trying to lower or change the cap amount. I'm trying to offer flexibility. And so it's a little odd to me that they wouldn't want that flexibility. So that's kind of confounding the conversations. I've had many conversations with them about it, and they'll jump in, I'm sure, themselves. And they've consistently talked about having some of the lower caps compared to other water utilities. That doesn't seem to be a reason to not have flexibility, to not allow for, sort of up to that cap. So, I'm happy to continue a conversation with them. And welcome your thoughts.
Thank you. Representative from WSSC.
Good afternoon. I'm Karen Riley, Director of Intergovernmental Relations for WSSC Water. Thank you all for the opportunity to comment on this. On this space, this bill looks good. I actually have our General Counsel here, Amanda Khan, who will discuss the legal issues we have with the part about live streaming, both video and audio meetings. It really does boil down to, when we talk about how this is applied to some of the other agencies, they do not have the need for the types of emergencies that we would have to address that could potentially be jeopardized if we make the changes to the Open Meetings Act requirements that we follow and exceed already. So I'll give you all an example. A couple of years ago, there was a sheen that was on the Potomac River, and we actually our commissioners had to take an emergency meeting to give us the authority, to give the general manager the authority to implement certain regulations, to suspend certain regulations so that we can make sure, like within, I think, 10 hours, we had a floatable boom up that protected our Potomac water filtration plant intake process. That could have been jeopardized if we had to wait for IT, wait for technology not to fail. We can talk about an amendment in case technology fails, but our concern is when we have pieces of legislation like this and these types of requirements, we have to prospectively contemplate what's going to happen. And what if there's an emergency situation? And in our case, unlike the Maryland Stadium Authority or PSC or something like that, in our case, when there's an emergency and we have to move, that means there are 2 million people in this area that are impacted by a public health crisis. So that's why we're saying the Open Meetings Act is complete in what it does. It gives us the flexibility to live stream and or produce meetings, which is what we do. Our live streams go back to 2013. Our meeting minutes go back to 2007. So we already have the Open Meetings Act is complete in allowing us to address all of these concerns without having to cherry pick different amendments and make the different arguments that this is good for the Maryland Stadium Authority. Okay. I'm not sure if Amanda has anything else to add. Amanda Khan is our General Counsel.
Ms. Khan, did you have anything else to add?
I don't. I think Karen covered it adequately. It's really the emergencies that we are most concerned about. And creating another standard that's different from the Open Meetings Act for a public body. I think that the last meeting you talked about this issue of starting to create different Open Meetings Act requirements for different public bodies, which really complicates the requirements of public bodies. So
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Councilmember Rice.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. President, and thank you to Ms. Riley, to Delegate Charkoudian. I think that we're very close to something that is going to do some good work in terms of continuing to promote transparency. I agree with that initiative altogether. My curiosity is around, because we are by county, has Prince George's County Delegation brought this up, or have they weighed in terms of this bill at this point?
No, they have not.
Okay, all right. So I'm very curious to see what their thoughts are as well. I mean, Ms. Riley, your concerns about when it comes to emergencies, I think that that's something that certainly is reasonable. And it sounds like Delegate Charkoudian is trying to work with you on that aspect. I think that that's incredibly important, not to stand in the way. I know that we as a council have, done our part in terms of promoting transparency. We've had emergency processes that we need to move forward and been able to make it work, but certainly ones in which I understand that the commission is different in that structure. Resources are different in that structure to some extent. And so I encourage the working together to try and figure out a way in which you don't stand in the way of those, because we all agree that we want the function of WSSC to move forward and not be hamstrung by processes, while again at the same time ensuring that we still have the transparency that's necessary to continue to foster community engagement and support. So from that perspective, I think that it seems as though we're headed in a good direction in terms of the amendments that are underway and in the works. So let me just ask Ms. Riley, is it my understanding that if the amendments were fostered, that then WSSC would be fine with those amendments that gave you the flexibility from an emergency standpoint to do what you need to, but still continued with the other things, or are there still concerns outside of that?
I think there still remain concerns outside of that because, again, we can't see the future to anticipate if there's a scenario where these amendments would not fully cover us in terms of the Open Meetings Act. The delegate indicated that she spoke to us about this legislation. We actually didn't have a robust conversation before it was introduced. So we saw it when it was introduced. So we cannot fully contemplate what will happen down the line. We're happy to review any amendments that she brings forth. But our concern with adding amendments to this is just we'll keep on having to add amendment upon amendment, depending on what the scenario or circumstance is, and it will be a reactive thing as opposed to proactive. But we're happy to look at anything she sets forth.
Thank you, Mr. President. I yield back.
Thank you. Councilmember Reamer.
Thank you. One issue that comes to mind, the county council considered this issue a number of years ago. It grew out of the Open Government Act that I proposed. And one of the things we found was that there's a distinction between recording and posting on the internet simultaneously. I think that's what Councilmember Rice was sort of alluding to. Like when we have a conflict right now where there's two committees that are meeting at the same time, we can't post them at the same time, but we can record them at the same time. And so our requirement is that every video must be recorded and posted, but they don't actually have to be broadcast on the internet at that moment. And I would share a concern that a requirement that you must be able to post the video on the internet as it is being, in real time, maybe that would be a little bit of an issue if there was a major storm event coming through. So I could hear what WSSC is saying there a bit, and I just wonder if the sponsor and WSSC might be able to work together a little bit to address this question. And perhaps there is a separability. I don't want to propose that, for the delegate. It's her. I'd like to hear what she thinks, but perhaps there's a separability of recording, and all meetings must be recorded and then posted versus they must be streamed. That could be a distinction that might be meaningful. I don't know. We're all kind of just spur of the moment here, but I would certainly welcome any additional work the delegate wants to do with WSSC and see if there's anything that they can advise.
WSSC? Who's going to continue the conversation?
I'm sorry, do you want me to go to the second part for the late fees now?
Well, no, we wanted to finish this part. I didn't know if there was any other comments from you.
Oh, no, we're done on this part. Thank you.
Okay. So what is the pleasure of the council at this point for this part?
I might suggest we take no position at this time and give it a little bit more time and see if
I'm comfortable with that as well.
Second.
No position, and I don't know that we need a motion, but.
Oh, sorry.
All those in favor of no position, please raise your hand. Okay, we are no positioning. Very good, thank you. And the second part was the up to 5%. Right now it's either or. Either you charge 5% or you charge nothing. You don't have any flexibility at all, Ms. Riley?
No, right now it is mandatory that we charge 5%. We are allowed, every WSSC water customer upon request is allowed to waive a late fee charge once every 12 months. What we do is, quite frankly, again, I know the delegate may not appreciate our point on this. She says that when she brought this to us, she indicated that this has not been reviewed since 1971. When our commissioners took this position to oppose last week, they did point out that as part of their governance function, they actually oversee like the rates and charges and make the recommendations. One of the reasons that this hasn't been recommended to be touched is because we don't have any other authority. So when we talk about the other utilities, the regulated utilities that can go up to, and they have the more flexibility, they have lien authority. They can recoup their funding through rate recovery when they do their rate setting process, whereas we don't have that. So this is kind of what we have as a deterrent. One of the things we do have flexibility on is because we have the customer assistance program legislation, we do have flexibility there to make a determination whether our most vulnerable customers can be assessed the late fees. And that's something we are definitely looking at. I think being in this pandemic has helped to spur us in terms of what we're looking at, how we can help our customers. And keeping in that same train and that same mindset, one of the challenges we do have with this piece of legislation is up to something that was mentioned a few minutes ago in another piece of legislation. If we have this, it will be the expectation that it will be lower. And right now, what we did ask the delegate when she did talk to us the first time about this a couple of weeks ago is, in this economic environment, we really are trying to navigate our way to figure out what is the best way and what is the best option. So our commissioners have indicated they would prefer to leave this as is until we understand what impact this pandemic has on us, and until that we can understand what options we do have currently under existing legislation.
Thank you. Councilmember Glass.
Thank you, Mr. President. These two issues are tied together in the same piece of legislation, which I think we just voted to hold, right, or to have no position.
Well, we did to the first part, but not the second part.
Okay. Thank you for that clarification. And so, Ms. Riley, you just brought up the point that I'm just curious about. And as a member of the T&E committee, we can have this separate conversation as well here in the council. But with regards to the pandemic that we're currently in, can you just share the number of users and WSSC users who are failing to pay their bill every month?
We have about 95,000 users who are delinquent in their bill right now. It's about a $62 million past due delinquency amount. We have suspended, as you all know, extended our shut-off moratorium as well as our late fee moratorium. So again, unlike other utilities, we are not charging late fees. We are not even thinking about it right now because we know what we do is so essential to getting through this. But that's the impact, and it's about double the number of what we saw year over year.
I appreciate that snapshot, but how did those numbers compare month over month, at least over the last 9 months?
There's every 3 months, right?
WSSC, right, quarterly.
Yeah, we charge quarterly, but we do look at the month to month. It has increased substantially since March of 2020, and I'm happy to get those numbers to you. I'm excited. I'm looking at the computer. I'm trying to pull up the report, but I'm afraid it will not work for me. But I can get you all those numbers month over month. We do present it at our commission meeting and our commissioners, and we actually have a meeting on these numbers at least once a week.
I appreciate that, and I think that information is just really important for this conversation, even if we take no position to recognize that our residents are having trouble paying their utility bills. And so whether there is a hard cap at 5% or allowing our utilities to be a little more flexible without setting that expectation as to whether it goes down, I think just giving them the flexibility to do that is really important, because clearly there is need, and we know there is incredible need across the board. And then while we took no position on the recordings, I will just use this in time to say I fully support that effort while supporting no position. We are all using Zoom, and we're all using Microsoft Teams and all these other platforms, and hitting record and hitting publish on YouTube is a very simple thing to do these days. I yield back.
Thank you. I have no other council members who wanted to speak on this topic. Is everyone okay to continue? It was involved in the same legislation as the last hold. So is everyone okay to keep this as a hold for both parts? I'm seeing Ed's. Yes, go ahead, Councilmember Joando.
Yeah, I am okay generally. I will say I would have supported if it was moved and broken out. I would support the authority on the 5%. I think Councilmember Glass's line of questioning is right. We know people are struggling, but if the sponsor can come back, I think I'm hearing a willingness. I certainly support the thrust of the bill, but find a hold right now.
Delegate, did you have a comment?
No, I mean, thank you for that. I think that giving the flexibility for times like these, which hopefully we won't see again, but we don't know what we might see in the future. And so it's useful to know that there's kind of at least some support, maybe others, for that part of it. And I planned to anyways continue to work with WSSC on the first part of it as well.
Thank you very much. So we are putting that on hold. And with that, we are moving to MCPG 101-21. Ms. Wenger.
I'm just going to turn it right over to Kathleen.
Okay.
All right, thank you. So this is a bill, just a heads up, that is essentially identical to, with one very small change, to a bill that was introduced last year, which the county executive supported, Park and Planning supported last year, and the county council did not take a position on. And you'll see in the packet that council staff is again recommending no position. So it's a bill that addresses a provision of current law that creates a 60-day shot clock for the planning board in each county to approve or disapprove a mandatory referral submission. Right now, the planning boards have 60 days to make a decision, approve or disapprove. They have no formal authority to require that an applicant provide supplemental information on their submission. Essentially, they've got to take what's submitted and make a decision. And if they don't act within 60 days, the default is that it's approved. So this bill would establish a process that allows the commission to go back and forth up to 3 times with the applicant to request supplementary materials that the planning board thinks that it needs to make a decision. And so it does allow the going back and forth 3 times. And frankly, if the applicant still doesn't provide what the planning board thinks it needs, that's the end of the game. The planning board still, has to make a decision, or it's a default approval. So again, county executive supports, Park and Planning supports. And last year it was approved by the Montgomery House delegation and passed the House of Delegates, but timing wise was not heard in the Senate by our local delegation or the full Senate before session adjourned. And I will note that Matt Mills, an attorney with Park and Planning, was here earlier and might still be on the call if there are questions for Park and Planning.
Okay. Thank you. Council staff.
Hi, this is Carolyn. Pam Dunn is on the call. There you go. Hi, Pam.
Good afternoon. I don't recall exactly why, when the council heard this last time, that a position wasn't taken, and it could have been waiting for more information. I know that there another piece of this that wasn't mentioned, but I think is important, is it does require the applications to be deemed complete, so that it is giving the planning department the ability to look at that application, gives them 3 days to go back to the submitting agency and require what is called a completed application, so that they can make that determination. And then Ms. Boucher was right that they can go back and forth numerous times to make sure they do have all the information that they need. Perhaps you want to hear from planning on this. I'm not exactly sure why the no position was before. We hadn't received any additional information since the last time the council has heard this that would sort of change that no position position, which is really why we would come back and say, well, now we think you should either support or not support something. Nothing material had changed.
Park and Planning staff, do you have any? Is there someone on and someone who'd like to comment? Going once.
Yeah, I'm looking to see, Matt Mills was on earlier. I don't
Okay.
Don't see them on now. But I would say Park and Planning did support it last year and submitted a position statement supporting it this year, which we shared with council staff.
Okay. What is the pleasure of the council?
I think we ought to support it. It does. We got a letter from Delegate Carr. That is the MNCPP position statement. He emailed it to looks like the T&E committee a few 10 minutes ago. So sounds like we have agreement.
So you are making a motion?
My understanding last year was that there was a legal question. I vaguely remember Jeff Zients mentioning some type of legal issue last year, and we hadn't heard back from Park and Planning. That's what I had recalled on this, which is why we decided to take no position. We didn't have a strong feeling about it. If that's been worked out, then that's great and that's fine. And if planning is fine with it, then I don't necessarily have an issue with it, but that's my recollection from last year.
Okay. Councilmember Reamer, was that a motion?
Well, no, I think Councilmember Friedson has raised an interesting question. So if we don't have Jeff Zients here, then I think we ought to
just hold it.
Yeah.
Is that me with everyone's approval? We're just going to hold this one. Okay.
I'm fine with that, but I just think that we need to get, should check on these issues so that when we do state ledge, we have all the information that we need in order to make the decision. So I just wanted to offer that.
Okay.
Yeah. And Mr. President, I agree. I appreciate Councilmember Friedson's memory. I think that's, the young person on the council is great, but
don't give him that much of a big head. Go ahead. Yeah.
No. I just think he's referencing something that wasn't included in any packet. I don't really remember it. I just, whether it happened, I'm sure he is remembering correctly. I just think, we should probably for the sponsors and for the process, if everyone agrees and there may be something we don't know about, so.
I'm willing to be corrected if I'm wrong, but that is my recollection from last year. There was no serious concern with this. It was a procedural and legal issue that was raised, and we hadn't heard at that point from Park and Planning, and so we decided to withhold. That's at least my recollection of it. If I'm wrong, then I'm happy to be wrong. But we should know if we've taken previous positions or have opted not to take previous positions on bills. That should be included in the packet with a summary of the discussion from the previous year for everybody to be aware. I think it's hard for all of us with all the various bills that we have before us. I mean, these are state bills. These aren't even bills we vote on. Normally we're taking positions on these bills. It's hard to recall all of them, but I do think that we need that information before us.
And I'm in agreement. And, the fact that some of us got, maybe I got it too, 10 minutes, before the conversation is not the best way to do business either. So with that, we have a hold. Is that everybody's okay with that? And so now we're on number MCPG 102-21.
Thank you, Mr. President. On the prior note, I would just say our office will be happy to work with council staff to make sure that kind of information is included in a packet going forward. So this next bill was requested by WSSC, and it right now under current law, certain employees at WSSC are required to file financial disclosure statements with their own Board of Ethics. They do not currently have authority to charge a late fee, and this bill would authorize a late fee of up to $500, $5 for every day the disclosure is late, with that max of $500. And it's supported by, again, requested by WSSC, supported by the county executive, and they did have a position statement again that I forwarded on to council staff that provided sort of a comparison. And under the state ethics law, there is the same late fee for the State Ethics Commission for late filing of financial disclosure statements. For our own Montgomery County Ethics Commission and Prince George's County Board of Ethics, there is a late fee of $2.50 per day up to $250. So that's it.
Thank you, council staff.
Thank you, Mr. President. Council staff recommends support of the bill. Seems to be an issue of, providing some teeth to the requirement of the financial disclosures. And as Ms. Boucher stated, there's similar authority, at the county level and also for other state agencies. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? Council motion?
Move to support.
Second. And it's moved by Councilmember Rice, second by Councilmember Reamer to support. All those in favor, please raise your hand. And that is unanimous. And the last one, I guess, because you said the last two are Prince George's County only.
Actually, the last three, I believe.
The last three are? Well,
This last, the MCPG 10421 applies to both counties.
Oh, I apologize. Okay.
okay. Kathleen?
Okay, so this bill does apply to both counties, although it is requested by a Prince George's County delegate, Delegate Walker. And from a procedural process, we'll have to get through the Prince George's County delegation before it even is considered by the Montgomery County delegation. It would mandate that that the Park and Planning Commission for both, in both Montgomery County and Prince George's County, create what the bill calls an innovative recreational youth program. And it includes examples, skate parks, lacrosse walls, remote control car courses. We don't know where this bill came from, and I have spoken with Adrian Gardner and at Park and Planning to see how he understood the bill. Park and Planning Commission does not understand where it came from either, and they did submit a position statement that I shared with council staff that it says the Park and Planning Commission wants to talk more with the sponsor to see where this came from. It also includes a mandatory appropriation, a state money, mandatory appropriation each year of $2 million for this program. And again, Park and Planning is sort of not sure where that came from and wants to talk with the sponsor. The county executive is not taking a position at this time pending how that develops and a better whether it gets through the Prince George's County delegation and what it's all about.
Thank you. Council staff.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to turn the floor over to Ms. Dunn if she has anything she would like to add. Thank you.
Good afternoon. When I first received the proposal, I contacted Director Riley of the Parks Department from Montgomery County to see, and he was reaching out to his colleagues on the commission. And yes, he didn't have a definitive standing on it right now, and really didn't know where some of the information had come from or what was the purpose of it. So, and he hasn't gotten back that they have taken a position on it at this time.
Okay. Councilmember Albernoz.
I'll just speak really briefly that there's an important difference and distinction between Prince George's and Montgomery, and that recreation is merged with the Parks Department in Prince George's County, whereas recreation is an executive branch agency in the county. And so it could be an apples and oranges issue. And I just encourage council staff as we follow up to make sure we remember that because it's an important distinction and often leads to confusion in programming and policy and unintended consequences. And I'll be curious to see what the background in this too, just because I'm curious, but just wanted to make that note.
Thank you. Councilmember Friedson.
Yeah, I appreciate that note. I mean, this is, first of all, a couple things. One, this is a state mandate that's coming with money. So I just want to point that out because it's very relevant to a previous conversation we had today that this is saying that you ought to do something at the county level, but we're going to pay for it to make it happen. And, I think we should make sure that anytime we are, asking for authorization or supporting a requirement that we ensure that it comes with the funding necessary to fulfill that requirement or that authorization. Number two, I think we need to be really careful here of what mandate this is creating. I think the former recreation director raises a really important issue that we need to just be really cautious and careful of it. I'm happy to do a hold because it does come with money. If it didn't come with the money, I would say we should just oppose it because certainly we could implement an internship program through park and planning without the state requiring it. But, since this is something that, Delegate Walker wants to do in Prince George's County, and because it comes with funding in order to do it, we should just make sure that it doesn't have unintended consequences for Montgomery County, and that the costs are not going to exceed it, and that we know what the breakdown between the cost of the requirement and the amount of money that Montgomery County will actually get out of the split between Prince George's and Montgomery, because that's going to be a key part of this as well. So there's a lot to figure out here. I'm happy for us to go with the staff recommendation for a whole, but I think we need to be very cautious in terms of how to proceed on this one.
Thank you. Councilmember Rice.
So having served with Delegate Walker and not proclaiming to know what's in his head, but knowing what his passion is, it is definitely around this issue. We've had numerous conversations about the great things that our recreation department under the leadership of Councilmember Albornoz has been able to do when it comes to skate parks and chill programs and things like that, that are the innovative things that unfortunately other jurisdictions just aren't doing. And so while again, not proclaiming to know exactly what's in his head, but knowing what he cares about most, which is out of school time and recreational activities, oftentimes that are denied to students that look like the kids in Prince George's. I certainly understand where he's coming from that perspective, and the frustration and not being able to be as successful as we have been in terms of broadening those opportunities to those children in Prince George's County. And so from that perspective, I definitely support the hold, but I do understand the direction that he's coming from, and do agree with Councilmember Friedson that when it comes to what we're looking at, which is money from the state, any way in which we might be able to leverage that without negatively impacting the current programming that we have in place would be great. So if staff can figure out a way to make sure that that money is funneled to these innovative programs we already have, and help to allay the costs, because they're incredibly expensive. I know chill program alone and some of the skate initiatives that are going out there, surfing. I mean, there's so much that recreation is doing that falls right in line with this right now. If there's a way to help allay some of those costs, that would be fantastic. So I agree, a hold is definitely the right thing, so we can figure out what the best mechanism is that doesn't impact, but really just want to again highlight our colleague, Councilmember Albornoz, who was at the forefront of this and really deserves a lot of credit. I'm a huge, passionate supporter of these innovative programs that are out there for our children. And so this is right in line with that. And so any way in which we can help leverage state funds to do these is incredibly important. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we're going to put a hold on this one and the next two as well. Councilmember Reamer.
I wanted to suggest that we put a hold on those next ones as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Is everyone okay with doing all three holds, this one and the next two?
And just a question, do we want to put holds on bills that have nothing to do with Montgomery County, or should we just take no position? Because are we ever going to have a position on those two bills that only impact Prince George's County? Just as a matter of...
It's a good question. Ms. Winger.
Seems to me that probably taking a position at no position is appropriate.
Yeah, I just think hold means we plan to take a position when further information or discussions take place. We plan to come back to it. No position is we formally decided not to take a position on this. And given that these two bills don't impact Montgomery County, right, but they're joint bills, as a local courtesy, I think we just take no position.
I second his no position.
All right, that's for the last two. How about on the one we just discussed? Is that a hold?
That's a hold. That's a hold.
Right. All right, so we're going to do a hold and no position on the last two. So correct. It's a hold for MCPG 10421, MCPG 10621 is no position, MCPG 10721 is no position. All those in favor? Somebody made the motion. Andrew made the motion. Craig seconded it. All those in favor, please raise your hand. And that is where we are. That's unanimous. Thank you very much. Ms. Wenger, do you have anything else for today?
I do not. So you know the schedule going forward, and we've got a fair number of things on hold. So as we get additional information, we will figure out how to communicate that and how those holds might turn into decisions or continued holds.
Very good.
Mel, do you want to discuss the state bills, or did I miss something that's not
because they were, I thought that we would hold off on those because they are not on the council's spreadsheet.
Great.
Okay. So with that, we are adjourned. Thank you very much.
Thank you.